Good evening, everybody. This is Tal Schnell here with Lead with Giants TV. I am joined this evening by Brian Sooy. He's the author of Raise Your Voice, A Cause Manifesto. Brian, welcome to our show.
Hi, Talon. Thanks for having me here.
Great, and we're delighted to have you. I know you've got some great material about the art of communication and leadership, so we'll look forward to getting into that conversation soon. But let's do a quick introduction. We'll go from my right, and we'll go with Liz Stinselli. Go ahead, Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Stinselli with Stinselli Advisors, joining you from Salt Lake City, Utah tonight, and glad to be here.
Glad to have you here this evening. And next, Dan Forbes.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan Forbes. I am hanging out from Sarasota, Florida. I have the good fortune of being the founder of the Lead with Giants community. You can find out more about that at leadwithgiants.com. Great to be here tonight with our panelists and our special guest, Brian Sooy. By the way, I like your sauce. The soy sauce. Is that what we're talking about tonight, Tom?
Yeah, that's a Florida humor, but we'll let this one go.
Oh, he has a book. And he has a book, too.
Yeah, this is in case. It's called the book. Raise Your Voice. It's a Cause Manifesto. It's a nice little book, but it has a lot of great stuff into it, which we'll go into it. And we really like your icon there that you came up with on your screen. Brian, go ahead and introduce a little bit about yourself and where you're hanging out from as well, please.
Well, I am calling in from Elyria, Ohio, which is about 28 miles west of Cleveland. And my firm is called Aspire. We work with mission-driven organizations, which will include nonprofits and philanthropies, to help them build purpose-driven communications through marketing, positioning, and web development. And design. We're essentially a design firm, and all of our communications work flows out of that design perspective.
Well, we're excited to have you and happy that you can join us, because I know you probably have a busy schedule and promoting the book this week. It's your book launch, so thank you so much for that. And last but not least, Andy Lyons.
Hey everyone, Andy Lyons here, hailing from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm looking forward to learning more about Raise Your Voice. And I hope I don't have to raise mine with Dan Forbes today. Now you pay good attention and you're a focused young man.
Okay.
Good. I'm glad that somebody is supportive and will help us there, since I'm hosting the show. But Brian, I want to start off with a quote that you shared with me this morning by James Humes, a presidential actually a writer for the president, several presidents. And you shared the quote is, "The art of communication is the language of leadership." So talk to us about that. Why should leaders pay attention so much to communication?
Well, in my experience, and I'm sure in many of your listeners as well as yours, you find that you can have a great leader who has a great vision, but if they don't communicate that, and if they don't have a way of connecting where they want to be and where they want you to follow them, they're going to turn around and nobody's going to be back there. So the idea that the art of communication, how you communicate, what methods you use, what words you use, the tone of voice, the body language, all that's important. And that's why I relate and Raise Your Voice to identity and personality and character, because I think these are character values. They're values that are more personal than they are anything. So then like what some people may call a brand. So communication being that language of leadership, knowing that if you're a leader, you need to be able to communicate in the way that your listeners, whether it's your team or your audience, needs to hear. You have to understand that as well. You'll have your style, but if your style doesn't match with the way your listeners are listening, there's going to be a gap.
So it's really about crafting your message to make sure that it's not just about your vision, but it's your audience that's listening and can relate with their heart and mind to your message.
Exactly. That's part of what I call be engaging. Engaging is not just having the opportunity to talk, but it's the opportunity to listen. My father always told me, and there's 3 boys in our family, and he always told the boys, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that was for a reason. so you could listen twice as much as you talk. And I think that's what being engaging is all about. Listen to what the community is saying, and listen to what your team is saying. If you're leading a team, no matter how big, you've got to understand what their perspective is, and be with them, be beside them. The idea of servant leadership, coming along beside versus leading from the front.
Very interesting. Well, let me open up the floor to our panel as well.
So Brian, I noticed that you focus a lot and use the word clarity, and I really like that word when it comes to communication, because I sense that one of the issues is the lack of clarity in communication, or the mismatch, for example, between maybe the vision that's been crafted and has been casted, and then the way that is lived out on a daily basis. So when it comes to clarity, how can, what's one or two ways that an organization can achieve the type of clarity that you're talking about?
Well, one of the stories I remember being told to me was a business leader who says to me, I have all these values and these ideas inside my head, but I don't know how to get them out. So in his mind, he knew where he was going, but he had not put them on paper and articulated them in a way that he could then convey them to his team. And that's one of the very first things that should be done. And whether it's sitting down on your own, and here's what I want to communicate, whether it's today or long term, and if you're a good leader, you're goal setting. So if I'm starting here and my goal is 2 years down the road, what are the things I need to do in between there, and how do I communicate to my team how we're going to get to each step of those? And the other way may be just sitting down with someone who's a facilitator who can listen, and if you have a great vision, you just either, maybe it's record it, or you just talk, and that person listens and pulls those comments out of the air for you.
Don't organizations or companies, or I know you do a lot in the nonprofit space, they sort of develop their own language, their own terminology, and so I would think leaders need to be proactive about that rather than to just allow that to happen by accident.
Yes, acronyms I think are the bane of every organization.
Yeah.
I've been doing some work with Entre Leadership, which is Dave Ramsey's leadership development, and they threw out KPI, and I had to stop. I mean, I've been in business 25 years, and I said, "What's a KPI?" And so, yeah, I think leaders need to understand that, especially when it comes to something like an acronym, or internally, their team may not know what those are. But think about organizations who are trying to communicate in any way, whether it's a nonprofit or a business of any kind, and they're trying to communicate with an audience or a customer, and they start using acronyms that aren't defined. So you're using language with words that are undefined to your audience, and where is that going to get you? So clarity is being clear from point A to the conclusion of the conversation about what words you're going to use, how you're going to define them, and how you're going to use them. Because if you're both using the same words, I think it's easier to then create a convincing and compelling argument of why, here's why you should follow me, because the reason A, B, and C, versus because the KPIs, that wouldn't make any sense to the listener.
Brian, can you talk just a little bit about how culture plays into how you communicate in your organization?
Sure. I had and that's a great question, Liz. I had a conversation with a friend just a few days ago, and he works in a chemical plant. And he said that he's moved into a supervisory role, and he's watched the managers over the 20 years he's been there, and he feels like the best plant manager who was there was one who was on the floor all the time, and always approachable, always open, always asking questions and listening to feedback. So he got this impression that a good manager comes alongside and helps, and that open culture of communication between the manager and the employees on the floor made everybody want to do their job better because they knew he was interested in them, and it was about how he felt about them. He said that culture has changed since the company was bought by a larger company, and more corporate HR people have come in, and more corporate style managers. And because my friend's style of leadership was not one of was not one of he said urgency, where he was maybe raising his voice and yelling and demanding, where it was one more of coming alongside. He said he actually had a performance ding on his performance review, and that was the word he used. He got dinged on his performance review because his culture of leadership was different than the way the company had changed. And they wanted everything to be urgent and fast because that's the way they think business should run. And we talked about how that eliminates the human side of business because we're all people. Everybody comes in with a different set of baggage every day, and we need to be there and understand that we're in this dynamic of relationships in the business, and how we communicate is going to motivate or demotivate people. And that's really what culture does. And does it motivate you to want to work better, or does it demotivate you?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
Brian, talk to us about, because you mentioned relationships and connections, how important that is to communication. And the only reason I ask is because sometimes as business leaders, they focus on the bottom line and they focus on results, but it's almost like putting the cart before the horse. Do you need to establish those meaningful relationship connections that you talk about? But some business leaders don't really get that. How do we fix that?
Yes, as a business leader, we always have to be cognizant of our internal communications and the internal relationships that we have. So how are you as a leader motivating your team? If they're not performing up to expectations, are you helping them and saying, is there another issue here at stake? One of the things I like to do with our staff is use disc profiles so I can understand how they're going to behave in a specific situation, or how they are best motivated. And that helps me build a relationship with them in terms of just knowing who they are more inside as well. And I know that that's different in different size organizations, but if you're going to be a leader, you need to understand too and know that you may only have the ability to manage 5 to 8 people within a group and lead them well. And then you have to have people that you're training to be leaders and people you're training to be leaders under that. So with that kind of a model, how can you not have a relationship with them and motivate them at the same time?
Mm-hmm. So it's really building that foundation of relationships first, get to know the person, and then you can have a better connection really to the leader's vision.
Sure, and you can have, as the leader, you can have more influence on leading those individuals as well. So I think in the big picture, in any organization, whether it's a nonprofit or if it's a business, the people who want to work there, or the people who want to be ambassadors or advocates for it, they're looking for a leader to follow. And it's up to us to step up and be that leader.
Great. Okay, we're concluding segment 1 here with Brian Sooy, the author of Raise Your Voice, and we'll continue on segment 2, but for right now we're concluding this one. Thank you.